A deep space probe brought back a mystery that shattered our understanding of reality. Dr. Aris Thorne's vessel returned to Earth not with rocks and dust, but with a single, pulsating crystal from a distant asteroid. Its energy signature defied every law of physics we thought we knew, instantly captivating the global scientific community. This object was the key to a discovery that would fundamentally redefine what it means to be human. By the end of this story, you will understand the incredible origin of our own DNA and the cosmic purpose hidden inside us all. We will uncover why this artifact chose us and what it demanded in return for the power it offered. What does true evolution actually look like? The hum was not a sound you merely heard. It was a frequency you felt deep within your chest, a vibration that seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of your own heartbeat. Inside the sterile, silent lab, the air itself grew heavy. Dr. Thorne and his team stood frozen, their faces bathed in the cool, shifting light of the hologram. It was not a simple image. It swirled and pulsed, a three-dimensional tapestry of interconnected lines and nodes that resembled a neural network more than any constellation they had ever seen. Aris reached a hand out, not to touch the light, but to feel its presence. "It is a map," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the resonant hum. But to what? The patterns were too intricate, too deliberately woven to be a chart of stars. Each glowing point was connected to others by shimmering threads, creating a structure of breathtaking complexity. It looked less like a guide to a place and more like a blueprint for a system, a cosmic circuit board. The crystal's low drone seemed to respond to their presence, its pitch shifting subtly as team members moved closer. It was as if the artifact was not just displaying information, but actively testing them, probing their reactions. One of the junior researchers, Ilara, noticed something that made her breath catch. She pointed a trembling finger toward the center of the luminous web. "The pattern there," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It does not just look like a double helix. It is one." The very core of the holographic map was an exact, luminous representation of human DNA, magnified to a cosmic scale and woven into a far larger structure. The artifact was not pointing outward to the stars, it was pointing inward directly at them. The map was not of a destination in space, but of an origin within our own cells. This revelation settled over the room with a profound and chilling silence. The question was no longer where the map led, but what or who had drawn it in the first place. The change began with a migraine, a pressure behind Lena's eyes that built for hours until the numbers on her screen began to shift. She was a lab technician. Her work focused on calibration and data logging, not theoretical physics. Yet one morning, the dense lines of quantum mechanical formulae scrolling past were no longer a cryptic language. They became as clear and intuitive as a childhood story. "The numbers just make sense now," she stammered, her hands trembling as she pushed away from her console. Her colleagues watched, first with amusement, then with a dawning, cold apprehension. Her pupils, when she finally looked up, held a flicker of silvery light, a metallic glint that was not a reflection from any screen. This was not a moment of scholarly insight. It felt more like a memory long buried, suddenly waking up. The team's initial excitement curdled into a profound unease. They were not just studying an object anymore. The object was studying them, and it had chosen its first point of contact. Lena's sudden fluency in a language of the cosmos suggested the artifact was not a mere tool, but a teacher, and its curriculum was written directly into their biology. What other lessons were waiting to be unlocked, and at what cost to the student? The migraine was only the beginning. Lena's transformation was a quiet tremor before the quake. It began with a flicker of lights, a momentary dimming that made everyone look up from their workstations. Then the air itself seemed to crackle, thick with static that raised the hair on their arms. A low groan echoed from the core containment chamber, the sound of stressed metal and overloading circuits. The artifact was no longer humming, it was screaming. An alarm blared, its red light painting the walls in frantic strokes. Security Chief Miller's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Lock it down," he barked into his comm. "Nobody in or out. Seal the vents," but the command came a heartbeat too late. The crystal flared with a light so intense it left purple afterimages burned into their vision. The reinforced containment field flickered, distorted, and then shattered like glass. It was not an explosion of force, but a silent, expanding wave of pure energy. It washed over the room, a shimmering tide that passed through walls as if they were not even there. It felt like diving into a sunlit ocean, a rush of warmth and light that was both beautiful and terrifying. The energy did not stop at the chamber door. It sought the path of least resistance, flowing into the ventilation shafts like a ghostly tide. Miller's lockdown had contained the people, but it could not contain this. Within seconds, the entire facility was breathing it in. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something ancient and metallic. Every single person inside, from the scientists in the labs to the engineers in the maintenance corridors, felt the wave pass through them. It was not a physical impact, but a resonance. A fundamental tuning fork struck against the very core of their being. The artifact had not been breached. It had broadcast itself, and now its message was rewriting the listeners from the inside out. What had been unlocked in Lena was now a potential waiting inside them all. The wave did not stop at the facility's perimeter. It traveled on the wind, through satellite signals, along the very strands of the global network. A silent whisper that became a roar inside the human genome. In a hospital in Mumbai, an elderly man with a terminal illness simply healed. His family watched in stunned silence as his vitality returned within hours, his body regenerating at a speed that defied every medical textbook. In a university in Berlin, a linguistics student who had struggled with basic syntax suddenly began speaking in a dozen extinct languages, her mind accessing linguistic patterns lost to history. The changes were not isolated. They were a symphony erupting simultaneously across the globe. News channels initially reporting on bizarre, localized phenomena soon pieced together the impossible truth. A familiar news anchor, her face a mask of professional composure betrayed by a slight tremor in her voice, addressed the world. "We are receiving confirmed reports from every continent," she announced, the gravity of her words settling over millions of viewers. "It appears a global, simultaneous evolutionary leap is underway." This single statement shattered the old world. Public euphoria erupted in some quarters, with crowds gathering in city squares, celebrating what they saw as a divine blessing or a long-awaited awakening. They called it the ascent, a sudden liberation from human limitation. But euphoria was only one side of the coin. Panic spread just as quickly. Governments scrambled to impose curfews as fringe groups declared the changed individuals to be impure, or perhaps no longer human at all. The very foundations of society, built upon a shared biological reality, began to fracture. A new divide opened, not between nations or ideologies, but between two potential versions of humanity itself. Were these abilities a gift, the next step in our collective journey, or was this a quiet, systematic replacement of who we had always been? The artifact had not just changed a few scientists in a lab. It had planted a seed in the soil of our entire species, and now the harvest was beginning. The celebration in the streets was a fragile illusion. Beneath the surface of this new world, the old instincts of power and fear began to reassert themselves. In secure bunkers and opulent conference rooms, world leaders watched the unfolding chaos and saw not a miracle, but a threat to global stability. The unified human front fractured almost overnight, splitting into two opposing camps with irreconcilable visions for the future. On one side stood General Davies, a man whose entire career was a monument to strategic defense. He saw the artifact and the changes it had wrought not as an enlightenment, but as the ultimate strategic weapon. His arguments were blunt and fueled by a deep-seated pragmatism. "We cannot allow this power to remain unchecked," he would state in tense security briefings, his voice echoing in the sterile rooms. If one nation learns to control this process, to weaponize these abilities, they will hold the entire planet hostage. Our only option is to secure the artifact, understand its mechanisms of influence, and develop a countermeasure. For Davies, it was a simple, brutal calculus of deterrence. He advocated for a full military seizure of the research facility, aiming to turn the key to human evolution into a shield, or perhaps a sword. Arrayed against him was Ambassador Chen, a diplomat known for her patience and long-term vision. Where Davies saw a weapon, she saw a library, a repository of knowledge that belonged to all of humanity. Her pleas were measured but carried a profound weight. "This is not a tool for war," she argued during a heated global summit. Her words transmitted to leaders around the world. "It is a key to our future. To approach it with aggression is to misunderstand its very nature. We have been given a chance to shed our old divisions, to evolve beyond conflict itself." She pushed for the establishment of an international consortium of scientists and philosophers, a transparent body dedicated to cooperative study. For Chen, the artifact's true purpose was unification, and to militarize it would be a betrayal of its gift. This schism tore through alliances that had stood for decades. Nations with strong military-industrial complexes rallied behind General Davies, their satellites turning toward the now quarantined research facility. Others, fearing a new biological arms race, threw their support behind Ambassador Chen's proposed council. The debate was no longer about science. It was a fundamental clash of ideologies, a battle over the soul of a transformed humanity. Would we use this new key to build higher walls or to finally open the doors? The silence in the lab was no longer peaceful. It was a taut, waiting quiet, broken only by the faint, persistent hum of the crystal. Aris Thorne sat before the main console, his eyes raw from strain, his mind grappling with the torrent of raw data the artifact had unleashed. The initial holographic map had been merely the cover of the book. Now they were reading the text inside. It was not a simple energy signature they were analyzing. It was a data stream of impossible complexity, a river of information encoded in the very resonance that had swept through the facility. Aris and his team, their own minds subtly accelerated by the event, worked to translate it. They were not looking at star charts or alien schematics. The patterns resolved into sequences, into structures that were hauntingly familiar. They were looking at genetic code. Aris watched as lines of data scrolled across his screen, each segment aligning with known sequences of human DNA, but then branching into new, impossibly elegant configurations. It was a side-by-side comparison of what we were and what we could become. His blood ran cold. "It is not a map to a place," he said, his voice a hollow whisper in the stillness. "It is a biological instruction set." He turned to his team, their faces pale in the screen's glow. "It is a recipe for rewriting DNA." The implication settled over them with the weight of a world ending. The artifact was not a key to a distant star. It was a tool, a delivery system for a genetic upgrade, a pre-written blueprint for a new version of humanity. "We are not the archaeologists studying a relic," Aris realized with a profound and chilling dread. "We are the project." The excavation site was not the distant asteroid. It was the human genome itself. Every person on Earth who had been touched by the wave now carried this latent blueprint within their cells, a set of instructions waiting for the right signal, the right environment to activate fully. The changes they had witnessed were not random mutations. They were the first, tentative lines of code being executed. The artifact had not come to give us a choice. It had come to finish a job that was started a very, very long time ago. What was the final product of this cosmic recipe, and who was the chef? Kale's first breath sounded like a power surge. He lay on the medical cot, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was not quite human. The induced resonance had lasted only minutes, but the man who emerged was fundamentally altered. His frame, once lean, was now corded with dense, efficient muscle that seemed to absorb the light. But the most profound change was in his eyes. They did not just reflect the overhead lamps. They glowed with a faint, internal luminance like the backlit display of a sophisticated machine. He slowly sat up, his movements fluid and unnervingly precise. He did not look at his hands in wonder or ask what had happened. Instead, he tilted his head as if listening to a distant frequency. "I can hear the city's network," he said. His voice was no longer his own. It was layered, a harmony of his natural tone and a buzzing, electric static that seemed to vibrate from his throat. The statement was not a metaphor. He was not imagining the hum of power lines or the digital chatter of the internet. He was perceiving the raw data stream of the entire metropolitan grid, the ebb and flow of information as a tangible, audible symphony. He reached a hand toward a nearby diagnostic terminal, not touching it, but simply holding his palm a few inches from the screen. The display flickered, then resolved into a cascade of code that was not part of its programmed interface. Kale was not operating the machine. He was conversing with it, his own restructured neural pathways syncing with its fundamental logic on a level beyond programming language. This was the first intentional transformation, a guided awakening of the blueprint sleeping inside human DNA. Kale was no longer just a man. He had become a living interface, a bridge between biological consciousness and the digital world we had built. His existence posed a terrifying and beautiful question. If one man could hear the city's electronic heartbeat, what would happen when humanity learned to sing along? The silence in the lab deepened, the humming crystal seeming to hold its breath. A new pattern began to coalesce within the holographic light. No longer a map of DNA or a data stream, but something more abstract. It was a resonance that shaped itself into meaning, a ghostly whisper translated by the very cells it had awakened in Aris Thorne. The voice was not a sound, but a concept that bloomed directly in their minds, ancient and vast and filled with a profound, echoing loneliness. "We were the architects of possibility," it began, "a species that learned to weave the fabric of existence itself. We did not build empires of stone and steel. We planted gardens of life in the barren soil of nascent stars." The message unfolded not as a history lesson, but as a memory, showing them visions of nebulae sculpted into cradles and DNA strands carefully encoded with latent instructions for greatness. "We seeded the universe with potential," the echo continued, its tone one of quiet fulfillment, not conquest. "But a garden must eventually tend itself. We have moved on to other realities, to new fields awaiting the seed." The final concept settled into Aris consciousness with the weight of a celestial body. "You are not our children, awaiting instruction. You are the next gardeners of reality." The hologram dissolved, leaving behind only the silent, pulsating crystal. The message was not an answer to their questions. It was a passing of the torch. The artifact was not a teacher, but a final watering can left for the plants that had now grown tall. The great mystery of who made us was solved, only to reveal a far greater responsibility. We had spent millennia searching for our creators in the stars, only to discover that their only desire was for us to finally become them. What do you do when you inherit the keys to the cosmos? The gardeners had barely understood their inheritance when the fences went up. The global debate between military control and open cooperation was rendered obsolete overnight, not by a government, but by a corporate signature. Omnicorp, a tech conglomerate so vast its economic footprint dwarfed entire nations, leveraged a labyrinth of international patents and legal precedents no one knew existed. They did not request access. They presented a claim of ownership, arguing that the deep space probe that retrieved the artifact utilized proprietary Omnicorp navigation systems. The legal justification was flimsy, but their enforcement arm was not. Private security forces, clad in sleek, non-military armor, surrounded the research facility. They were polite, professional, and utterly immovable. Within 72 hours, the artifact was carefully, surgically extracted from its containment chamber, placed inside a shielded transport, and launched toward the heavens. Its new home was the Omnicorp Celestial Archive, a private orbital station that now hung in the sky like a glittering, inaccessible diamond. From a pristine broadcast studio aboard that very station, CEO Julian Vance addressed the world. His smile was calm, his suit impeccable, a vision of corporate serenity. "We stand at the precipice of a new era for humanity," he began, his voice a smooth, reassuring baritone. "Uncontrolled evolution is chaos, a danger to the societal structures that keep us safe and prosperous. Omnicorp did not create this marvel, but we alone possess the vision and the resources to shepherd its potential responsibly." Then came the statement that would echo through every capital and every home on the planet. The process of genetic ascension, the very blueprint for the next step in human development, will be patented, standardized, and made available through a secure, licensed platform. Humanity's evolution, he declared, will be monetized. The word hung in the air, cold and final. It was not a weapon they sought to control, nor a library of knowledge. It was a product. The cosmic recipe for rewriting human DNA was now intellectual property. The reaction was a seismic shift in the fledgling conflict. Governments who had been posturing for a military strike now found their target was a civilian corporate asset protected by a web of international trade law. Ambassador Chen's coalition for peaceful study disintegrated, its ideals shattered against the hard reality of a buyout. A new, desperate race began, not between nations, but between Omnicorp and the rest of the world. Black market labs sprang up overnight, attempting to reverse engineer the changes from biological samples taken from people like Lena and Kale. These underground geneticists were not trying to understand the artifact's message. They were trying to pirate its operating system before Omnicorp could establish a complete monopoly. The question was no longer whether humanity would evolve, but who would hold the keys to the kingdom. Would our future be a corporate subscription service, or could the seeds of change, already planted within millions, find a way to grow wild? The corporate takeover of human evolution did not create a world of order, but a crucible for rebellion. In hidden corners of the fractured city, they gathered. They were the ones who had felt the resonance awaken something inside them, the ones who could not accept a future sold to them in monthly installments. They called themselves the Awakened, and they found their leader in the man who had first understood the artifact's true nature. Aris Thorne, his face etched with a new and weary resolve, looked out at the small, determined group. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. "They want to cage the future," he told them, his words echoing in the dimly lit space. "We must set it free." This was not a call for violence. It was a declaration of intellectual and biological independence. Their plan was audacious, a symphony of their new abilities. Lena, whose mind now perceived the underlying mathematics of security systems, would find the flaw in the Celestial Archive's digital armor. Kale, the living interface, would become their key, syncing his consciousness with the station's core network to bypass its defenses. Others, whose alterations granted them heightened senses or an intuitive understanding of physics, would form the logistical backbone. They were not soldiers. They were scientists, engineers, and artists, united by a shared truth. They had seen the gardener's blueprint, and they refused to let it be locked inside a corporate vault. Their rebellion was not born in the glare of publicity, but in the quiet spaces between the digital streams and the forgotten tunnels beneath the city. It was a war fought with lines of code and moments of perfect intuition, a desperate attempt to reclaim a destiny that had been written in the stars and then patented in a boardroom. Could a handful of altered humans outmaneuver the most powerful corporation on Earth? Or was their hope just the last spark before a permanent, corporate-controlled night? The Celestial Archive was a fortress of light and logic, a labyrinth of titanium corridors and laser tripwires designed by the finest security minds on Earth. To the awakened, it was a house of cards. They drifted through its defenses not as invaders but as ghosts. Lena stood before a primary airlock, her eyes closed, her mind tracing the intricate dance of magnetic locks and pressure sensors. She saw the system not as a barrier, but as a sequence of musical notes. A slight, almost imperceptible adjustment to the harmonic frequency, and the massive door slid open with a sigh, bypassing 3 separate alarm protocols. It was not a hack, it was a correction. Kale approached the next checkpoint, a shimmering energy field that flickered with lethal potential. He did not raise a tool or type a code. He simply extended a hand, his fingers not touching the field but seeming to weave into its underlying data stream. A low, static-laced hum resonated in his throat, a sound of pure information. The field dissolved into harmless static. "Their systems are primitive to me now," he whispered, the words layered with the buzzing symphony of 1,000 concurrent processes. He was not boasting. It was a simple statement of fact, like a master watchmaker observing a child's toy. To him, the station's core intelligence was a slow, simple melody, and he could compose a new harmony around it without it ever noticing the change. They moved as one organism, a single consciousness distributed across several bodies, each member compensating for the others, their unique talents weaving together into a key that fit a lock Omnicorp never knew existed. They slipped through the station's heart like a thought, unseen and unregistered, leaving no trace but the lingering echo of a future that refused to be caged. They were inside, the artifact was close, but what other guardians, perhaps less predictable than computers, awaited them in the archive's inner sanctum? The vault was not a room of cold steel, but a chamber of living crystal, its walls pulsing with the same soft light as the artifact resting at its center. Aris stepped forward, his breath catching. This was not a storage facility. It was a throne room, and the artifact was its silent monarch. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and made contact. The moment his skin touched the cool, smooth surface, the world dissolved. It was not a simple transfer of information. It was a deluge, a river of cosmic purpose flooding his mind. He saw not just the genetic blueprint for humanity, but the reason for it. Visions cascaded through his consciousness, planets with barren atmospheres thickening with breathable air, toxic soils being neutralized by engineered microbes, entire ecosystems being coaxed into harmony by a gentle, pervasive resonance. The artifact was not merely a key to unlock human potential. It was a tuning fork for reality itself. He staggered back, his hand falling away, his eyes wide with a revelation that redefined everything. "It does not just change us," he gasped, the words torn from a place of profound understanding. "It changes our world to suit us." This was the gardener's true tool. The genetic awakening was not the end goal, but the first and most crucial step. A species had to be made adaptable, resilient, and perceptive enough to handle the immense responsibility of planetary engineering. We were not just the gardeners, we were the seeds, and this artifact was the sunlight and the rain, designed to help us first root ourselves, and then transform the soil around us. The interstellar travel the architects had achieved was not about building faster ships. It was about learning to make any world a home, to bend the very environment to the needs of life. The artifact's purpose was to initiate that process, to give a species the biological tools to become universal stewards. The question was no longer about who we could become, but what we could build. And with OmniCorp holding the only tool that could start the construction, the fate of Earth itself now hung in the balance. Julian Vance stepped from the shadows of the vault, his polished smile gone, replaced by a placid, unnerving calm. The air around him seemed to warp, thickening with an invisible pressure that made it difficult to think. "I must thank you for your service, Aris," he said, his voice no longer a corporate baritone but a resonant hum that vibrated in their bones. "You delivered the key, and my associates have now unlocked the door." His eyes, when he looked at them, held the same faint, metallic luminance as Kale's, but his shone with a cold, absolute control. "The change in me was not an accident," he continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "It was the first successful corporate integration, a necessary evolution for leadership." His gaze swept over the awakened, and the psychic pull was immediate, a tidal force against their minds. "You feel the resonance, do you not, the urge to harmonize? To obey, it is the next logical step. A collective will directed by a single clear vision. One of Aris' own, a young woman named Ilara, who had once deciphered the artifact's first map, suddenly stiffened. Her face, once alight with curiosity, went slack. Her eyes glazed over, reflecting Vance's silvery light. "I'd understand," she murmured, her voice a hollow echo. "The order." She turned not toward Aris but toward Kale, her hands lifting not in greeting but in a gesture of restraint. Two others followed her, their movements synchronized, their individuality erased by the overwhelming psychic command. "You see," Vance said, his voice a soft, insidious whisper in their minds, "the blueprint has a master switch. You will not fight the new order, you will serve it." In that moment, the rebellion fractured from within. The fight was no longer against external security, but against the very bonds of trust that had held them together, twisted into shackles by the man who now owned their future. The psychic pressure was a physical weight, crushing their thoughts into submission. Aris Thorne stood firm, a solitary rock against Vance's mental tide. He had spent weeks immersed in the artifact's resonance, not just studying it, but learning its rhythms, building mental fortifications out of the very knowledge Vance sought to own. He met the CEO's gaze, and the air between them crackled with invisible force. "Your control is an illusion," Aris gritted out, each word a focused lance of will. "You see a collective will, but you have only built an echo chamber of your own ego. The artifact's purpose is connection, not domination." With a surge of pure, defiant clarity, Aris did not push back against the command. He unraveled it. He targeted the fragile psychic threads Vance had used to ensnare his friends, not severing them with brute force, but gently retuning them, reminding Ilara and the others of their own unique frequencies, their own memories and hopes. It was like reminding a choir of their individual voices after being forced to sing a single, monotonous note. The silver light faded from Ilara's eyes, replaced by a dawning horror at what she had almost become. She stumbled back, free. The others shook their heads, their own wills snapping back into place. The victory was immediate, but it came at a cost. The psychic duel had been a storm raging through the station's sophisticated systems, which were already delicately intertwined with Kale's own consciousness. The feedback was catastrophic. A deep groan shuddered through the deck plates. Emergency lights flashed, casting the crystal vault in a hellish red strobe. Conduits along the walls sparked and hissed, overloading as the station's core stability began to fail. Their rebellion had won back their minds, but in doing so, they had critically wounded the very structure holding them in the void. They were free, but they were now adrift in a dying star. The psychic shockwave did not fade. It rippled outward from the orbital station, a distorted resonance that washed over the Earth like a rogue tide. The artifact, its stabilizing protocols shattered by the mental conflict, was now broadcasting a raw, unfiltered signal. This was not the careful blueprint of the gardeners. It was a storm of genetic potential, and it began to rewrite the world at random. In a rainforest canopy, a troop of monkeys suddenly fell silent, their fur shifting in a chromatic wave to mirror the leaves around them, their calls becoming complex, melodic phrases that sounded almost like language. On a city rooftop, a patch of weeds erupted into a garden of crystalline flowers that hummed in the wind, their structures defying known botany. The changes were no longer confined to humanity. The very planet was beginning to sing a new song, its melody composed of altered DNA. This was the Cascade effect, a planetary scale transformation triggered by a broken tool. The carefully laid plans of both Omnicorp and the Awakened were now irrelevant. They had been fighting over the controller to reality, and in their struggle, they had broken it, leaving the system to run wild. The question was no longer who would guide evolution, but whether anyone could survive the beautiful, terrifying garden that was now growing untamed. The chaos of a transforming Earth was silenced by a new frequency, a single, clear note that cut through the psychic static. From the heart of the damaged artifact, a final data packet bloomed in the minds of every awakened individual simultaneously. It was not a plea or a command, but a simple, profound offering. The message contained two things: a set of spatial coordinates pointing to a star system on the far edge of the galaxy, and the complete schematics for an engine that manipulated gravity itself. The voice of the architects returned one last time, its tone now one of gentle urgency. "The cradle is ready," it resonated, "but you must leave the nursery." The meaning was inescapable. Earth was the nursery, a protected place where humanity had been seeded and nurtured. But a child cannot stay in a cradle forever. The planet-wide cascade was not a malfunction. It was a final, irrevocable signal that our time of sheltered growth was over. The transformation of Earth itself was the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The coordinates led to a world already prepared, its atmosphere and ecosystem tailored by the architects long ago to welcome a species that had achieved its biological awakening. The schematics were not for a simple rocket, but for a star drive that folded space, a technology that made interstellar travel not a distant dream, but an immediate possibility. This was the Exodus Protocol, the gardeners' final gift and their ultimate test. They had given us the tools to grow, and now they were giving us a new home. But the offer came with a cosmic deadline. The beautiful, terrifying garden Earth would soon be incompatible with the humanity we had been. We could not remain as we were, and we could not stay where we were. The choice was no longer about controlling evolution, but about embracing a destiny written in the stars. Would we build the Ark, or would we choose to fade into the strange, new wilderness we had created? The architect's final message fractured the global stage into a stark choice between two irreconcilable paths. In the United Nations General Assembly, the air was thick with a tension that felt like the prelude to a storm. General Davies stood at the podium, his frame rigid, his voice a low rumble of grim certainty. He gestured to a star map highlighting the coordinates from the message. "This is not a rescue, it is a reconnaissance," he declared. "They gave us an address." Any civilization capable of such a feat would also be capable of tracking who answers the door. His argument was a fortress built on the oldest human instinct: survival. We must assume that our first contact will not be with gardeners, but with harvesters. Our priority must be planetary defense, a shield powered by the very technology they sent us. We must meet them with strength, or we will be met with extinction. His words painted a vision of Earth as a fortress world, its atmosphere bristling with gravity-warping cannons, a porcupine aiming its quills at the stars. The applause from his faction was not enthusiastic, but grimly determined, a sound of people choosing a fearful certainty over an unknown hope. Then Ambassador Chen approached the same podium. She did not look at the star chart. She looked at the faces in the room, her expression one of profound sorrow. She spoke softly, yet her voice carried to every corner of the hall. For millennia, we have looked to the heavens and seen either gods or monsters, she began. We have never been able to see simply neighbors. The artifact did not change our DNA to make us better soldiers. It changed us to make us ready to step onto a stage we cannot even comprehend. She turned her gaze to General Davies. The general's plan is not a path to safety. It is a path to ensuring his fears come true. If we build weapons, we anticipate a war. If we anticipate a war, we will inevitably create one. We are being offered a chance to evolve beyond the cycle of conflict that has defined our entire history. If we refuse, if we cling to our fear, then we will not be destroyed by some alien force. We will be destroyed by the very paranoia we call protection. Her plea was a quiet counterpoint to the general's thunder, a call to lay down the burden of an ancient suspicion. The debate was no longer about technology or strategy. It was a referendum on the human soul. Would we project our own darkest nature onto the cosmos? Or were we finally brave enough to believe we could be something more? The debate ended not with a vote, but with a shared, unspoken understanding that settled over the planet. The choice for defense or isolation had been rendered moot by the simple, undeniable truth of the artifact's final message. The nursery door was closing, and we had to leave. What followed was a mobilization the world had never seen. A global effort that made the construction of ancient pyramids or modern metropolises look like child's play. It was called the Great Build. National borders blurred into irrelevance as the planet's collective genius, now amplified by the genetic awakening, was channeled into a single, staggering project. In vast, newly formed dry docks that stretched across deserts and sheltered bays, the skeletons of starships began to take shape. These were not the cramped capsules of early spaceflight, but vast, graceful arcs. Their designs derived directly from the architect's schematics. Their hulls were woven from metamaterials that could self-repair, and at their hearts throbbed the impossible physics of the gravity drive. Aris Thorne, his face etched with the weight of a species' hope, stood at the nerve center of the primary construction zone, watching a kilometer-long spine be lowered into place with telekinetic precision. He was not giving orders so much as harmonizing the effort, his mind a central node in a planetary network of creation. "We are not just building ships," he said. His voice carried on the wind to the thousands of workers, thinkers, and visionaries around him. "We are building a new destiny. Every welded seam was a promise, every calibrated thruster a prayer." A structural engineer, her perception altered to see stress flows as shimmering colors, would guide a team to reinforce a weak point with an effortless gesture. A materials scientist, who could now commune with molecular structures, would whisper to a vat of alloy, coaxing it to form bonds of impossible strength. It was a symphony of human potential, each individual's unique talent an essential instrument in the orchestra. The pace was not merely fast, it was miraculous, a blur of coordinated activity that defied every previous law of project management and physical limitation. The fleet grew not day by day, but hour by hour, rising from the earth like a forest of silver seeds ready to be cast toward the stars. They were building their own exodus, and in the process, they were discovering that the true purpose of their evolution was not to conquer the universe, but to finally join it. The Great Build was a testament to unity, but it could not silence every whisper of fear. While the arcs took shape, a different kind of blueprint was being drawn in the shadows. They called themselves the Purists, a faction who saw the genetic awakening not as an ascent, but as a contamination. They believed the soul of humanity was being erased, replaced by a cold, alien logic, and they were willing to become martyrs to stop it. Their target was the source, the corrupted heart of the change still humming within the damaged Omnicorp station. They would sever the head of the serpent, even if it meant their own end. A small team, disguised as maintenance crew, managed to slip past the heightened security. Their cargo not tools, but enough high-yield explosives to turn the Celestial Archive into a brief new star. Kale, his consciousness perpetually intertwined with the station's faltering network, felt the intrusion not as a breach, but as a sudden, dissonant chord. His eyes snapped open, the familiar electric hum in his voice sharpening into an alarm. "They are here," he broadcast to Aris and the others, his mental voice strained. "They have planted a device in the core vault." His next words were not just a warning, but a chilling diagnosis of an ancient human sickness. They would rather die as they are than live as they could be. The race was no longer against corporate enforcers or failing systems, but against a timer counting down to a pointless oblivion. The disarming was a surreal ballet of urgency and precision. While Lena used her enhanced perception to map the bomb's complex wiring from a distance, Kale attempted to remotely isolate the triggering signal, his mind a frantic counterpoint to the device's simple, brutal logic. Aris coordinated their efforts, his own understanding of the artifact's resonance allowing him to sense the subtle vibrations of the explosive compound, a deadly rhythm he had to help them silence. They worked not to save the station, which was already dying, but to save the Purists from their own despair, and to prevent a blast that would scatter the last, broken pieces of the artifact across orbit, severing humanity's final tangible link to the Gardeners. In that tense, silent struggle, surrounded by the beauty of a technology meant to build worlds, they confronted the stubborn, fearful ghost of the old humanity, a ghost that preferred a funeral to a future. The disarmed bomb lay inert at their feet, a silent monument to a fear they had narrowly escaped, but their victory was hollow. A deep, resonant crack echoed through the crystal vault, a sound of profound and final breaking. Fissures spread across the artifact's surface, its inner light guttering like a dying star. Aris placed a hand on its cool, fracturing shell, his own resonance allowing him to feel the last, fading ember of its power. His face was a mask of grim realization. "It has one final pulse left in it," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the choice. "Enough energy for one last, perfect broadcast. We can use it to complete the change in everyone, to finish the genetic awakening for every person on Earth. Or we can use it to send the full, stabilized coordinates to the entire fleet, ensuring they can make the journey. We cannot do both." Silence swallowed the chamber. This was no longer a debate between ideologies, but a brutal calculation of survival. To complete the change meant creating a unified humanity, fully awakened and ready to meet its destiny, but potentially stranded on a planet that was transforming into an alien landscape. To send the coordinates guaranteed an escape, a future for millions, but it would leave the vast majority of humanity only partially altered, forever trapped between what they were and what they were meant to be. They would be a people divided, some reaching for the stars while others remained in a cradle that was no longer safe. Kale, his connection to the station's systems fraying, spoke through the static in his voice. "A partial key is worse than no key at all. It creates a permanent underclass, those who could not ascend. The social fracture would be unimaginable." Lena looked toward the viewing port, at the beautiful, terrifying bioluminescent storms now dancing in Earth's atmosphere. "But if we all change completely, who is left to pilot the ships? The transformation is unpredictable. We could become something too different, too detached from the physical world to even care about leaving." The artifact pulsed weakly, a faint, rhythmic throb like a failing heart, forcing their decision. Aris thought of the Gardeners, of their gentle insistence that a species must be ready. Readiness was not just about ability, but about wholeness. A fractured people could not tend a new garden. He made the call, use the pulse to send the coordinates. Every detail, Ensure the fleet can find its way home. The choice was a terrible sacrifice, a conscious decision to leave potential unfulfilled for the sake of a concrete future. As Kale channeled the artifact's last breath of energy into a focused data burst, a wave of profound loss washed over them. They had chosen the path of the practical, the possible, over the path of the perfect. A final, brilliant flare of light erupted from the crystal, carrying the star map to the waiting arcs, and then it died, its surface turning to dull, inert stone. They had secured a journey for the body of humanity, but had they left its soul behind? The silence in the command center was absolute, a physical weight pressing down on the gathered assembly. Before them, displayed on the central hologram, were the two stark choices born from the artifact's dying pulse. On one side glowed the symbol for a complete genetic awakening, a single, unified humanity. On the other, the perfect stellar coordinates, a guaranteed path to a new home. Aris Thorne stood before the world's remaining leaders and his fellow awakened, his face a landscape of exhaustion and resolve. "We have inherited a choice the architects never intended for us to make," he began, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "Do we become the people we were meant to be, or do we ensure we have a place to be it?" This is not a vote on policy. It is a vote on the soul of our species. One by one, they cast their votes, a process conducted not with raised hands, but with a focused mental resonance that lit their chosen symbol with a soft glow. An agricultural expert from a transformed region argued for completion. "My people are already changing the soil, making the blighted lands fertile again. If we are to heal this world, even as we leave it, we must be fully capable. We must become the gardeners now." A logistics coordinator for the fleet, her mind brilliant with organizational patterns, voted for the coordinates. "Hope is a fragile thing," she countered. "Without a guaranteed destination, that hope shatters. We can evolve later. First, we must survive." The tally hung in a near-perfect balance, a reflection of a world torn between its past and its future. The final vote belonged to General Davies, the old soldier who had once advocated for turning Earth into a fortress, looked from the hopeful faces of the awakened to the determined eyes of the engineers. He thought of the Purists' bomb, of the fear that nearly destroyed them all. He saw that the greatest threat was never from the stars, but from the divisions within. His voice, when he spoke, was stripped of all its former bluster, leaving only a raw, weary honesty. "I spent my life preparing for the wrong war," he said. "I will not have my legacy be that we saved a fleet, but lost our chance to become something more." He cast his vote. The symbol for a complete genetic awakening glowed brightly, and the decision was made. There would be no underclass, no partial humanity left behind. They would face the future together, whatever form it took. The weight of the choice settled over them, not as a burden, but as a solemn pact. They had chosen unity over certainty, a terrifying and beautiful leap of faith into their own potential. A profound stillness fell over the command center, the weight of their decision a tangible presence in the air. The choice was made, but the mechanism to enact it was dying before their eyes. On the monitor, the artifact's energy signature was collapsing into a flat line. Aris Thorne did not look at the screen. He was watching the crystal itself in its shielded vault, feeling its fading resonance like a whisper in his own soul. It was not a machine breaking down. It was a consciousness slipping away. He understood now, with a chilling and absolute clarity, what had to be done. The artifact was a bridge, and its final act required a foundation on both sides. It needed a human anchor. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the silence with the force of destiny. "I will carry the message," he said. The words were not a boast, but a solemn vow. He would merge his own life force with the artifact's dying ember, using his transformed biology as a living amplifier to broadcast the signal for a complete awakening to every last person on Earth. It was not a repair, It was a transfusion, and he was the donor. Lena grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with panic. Aris, no, the energy will overwrite you. It will unmask you. There is no telling what you will become. He met her gaze, his own filled with a heartbreaking peace. I know, he replied softly, but a message this important should not be sent by a machine. It should be carried by a person. To become the beacon, he had to cease being merely Aris Thorne. He walked into the vault and placed his hands upon the cold, fractured crystal. The connection was instant and absolute. A torrent of pure information, the entire genetic blueprint of the architect's design, flooded into him. It did not feel like an invasion. It felt like a homecoming to a home he never knew he had. His body did not convulse in pain, but began to glow with a soft, internal light. His form became less solid, more like a sculpture made of captured starlight. He was not being destroyed. He was being translated. His individual thoughts, his memories, his very sense of self, began to dissolve into the vast, cosmic chorus of the message he now carried. He was becoming the signal. A final, radiant pulse of energy erupted from him, flowing out through the station, through the atmosphere, and across the entire planet. It was a wave of gentle, irresistible clarity that touched every single human mind, not as a command, but as an invitation to remember a potential they had always carried. In that moment, Aris Thorne ceased to be a man. He became a living testament, a permanent part of the human story, his sacrifice woven into the very DNA of the species he helped to awaken. He had not just sent the message, he had become it. The wave began not as a sound, but as a warmth that bloomed in the chest of every person on Earth. It was Aris Thorne's final act. His consciousness fused with the artifact's dying pulse, and it washed over the planet in a tide of silent, golden light. A construction worker in Cairo paused, her tool hanging in midair as a chronic pain in her joints simply vanished. A newborn in a Tokyo hospital, struggling for breath since birth, suddenly stilled, her tiny lungs filling easily for the first time. In a quiet suburban home, an elderly artist whose hands had been twisted by age looked down in wonder as his fingers straightened. The tremor gone, an old, forgotten creative energy flowing back into them. It was not a chaotic rewriting, but a gentle correction, a finishing touch applied to the masterpiece of human DNA. Illnesses that had plagued humanity for millennia were quietly edited out, not by a foreign power, but by the awakening of a latent, self-repairing code that had always been there, waiting for the signal. But the healing of the body was only the beginning. As the light faded from the sky, a deeper shift occurred in the collective human mind. A fisherman off the coast of Norway, alone on the deck of his boat, suddenly felt a profound, non-verbal understanding of the migrating whales passing beneath him. A financial trader in New York, surrounded by the frantic noise of the market, experienced a startling moment of clarity, perceiving the interconnectedness of global economies not as numbers, but as a single flowing system. People everywhere, from the most crowded cities to the most isolated villages, instinctively looked up. They did not need to speak. A shared awareness passed between them, a silent recognition that they were no longer just individuals. They were neurons in a newly awakened global mind, each person a unique point of light in a vast, emerging consciousness. The great loneliness that had haunted the human species since its beginning was, in that single moment, healed. They were whole, they were connected, and they were finally ready to see the universe not as a cold, empty void, but as a home they were now prepared to tend. What would a civilization, free from the burdens of fear and sickness, choose to build with such a connection? The sky above Earth began to shimmer, as if the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. Across every continent, from the vast new shipyards to the calm surfaces of the seas, the great arcs ascended. It was not a series of launches, but a single, coordinated flowering of silver against the blue marble of the world. Millions of vessels, their gravity drives humming in a silent, planet-wide chord, rose as one. They moved with a grace that defied their immense size, a migratory flock of impossible scale turning its face toward the stars. From the lead vessel, a simple, powerful transmission echoed across the fleet, a voice filled with the resonance of their shared awakening. "We do not leave our home behind," the captain said, her words carrying the weight of a new truth. "We take our world with us in our blood and in our bones." The coordinates burned bright in their navigation systems, a gift from a man who had become a star to light their way. They were not fleeing a dying planet, but carrying its living essence, its complete genetic memory into the cosmos. Each ship was a seed pod, and inside, a newly unified humanity looked back only once, not in sorrow, but in gratitude, before turning to embrace the infinite garden that awaited them. The silence of the void was not empty, but alive with a new kind of music. For months, the fleet had sailed through the familiar dark, but now space itself began to warp around them. The starfield outside the viewports shimmered like a heat haze, and the ship's gravity drive stuttered, its reliable hum faltering for the first time. Navigator Ilara watched her instruments with a calm that would have been impossible for her old self. The readings made no sense according to any physics she had ever known. Space here was not a static stage, but a fluid, thinking thing, and it was pushing back. She closed her eyes, letting her mind, now a perfect instrument for perceiving dimensional layers, feel the pressure. "It is not fighting us," she reported, her voice a blend of awe and intense focus. "It is teaching us." The region was a cosmic training ground, a place where the very fabric of reality was pliable, waiting for a consciousness with the right touch to shape it. One ship, relying solely on its automated systems, tried to force its way through a gravitational eddy. The space around it thickened, halting its progress as gently but firmly as deep water resisting a stone. Another vessel, its crew mentally harmonizing, perceived the flow of the spatial currents. They did not push against the resistance, but instead, their collective intent softened the local laws of physics, creating a temporary corridor of calm. They were learning to persuade reality, not command it. The journey became a lesson in collaboration with the cosmos itself. Ilara, her hands resting lightly on the navigation console, began to guide the entire fleet not by plotting a course, but by composing a resonance. She would send out a gentle psychic pulse, a question, and space would answer, folding itself into a new pathway just ahead of their bows. They were no longer travelers passing through the void. They were weavers, learning to fold the tapestry of reality to their will, discovering that the ultimate destination was not a place on a map, but a state of symbiotic understanding with the universe. The starfield ahead of them seemed to part, the deep black of the void giving way to the soft, brilliant blue of a world suspended in the light of a gentle sun. It was not merely an Earth-like planet. It was a mirror, reflecting back the perfected image of the world they had left behind, but one where every mountain range, every ocean current, and every swirl of cloud in the atmosphere felt deliberately, lovingly arranged. The data streaming across their screens confirmed the impossible. The atmosphere was a perfect balance of gases for their new biology, the soil rich with nutrients their bodies would instinctively know how to use, and the planetary magnetic field hummed at a frequency that resonated with their own awakened selves. It was not a new world they had discovered. It was a home that had been prepared for them, a residence built for the specific tenants they had become. Over the open comm channel, a child's voice, small and filled with a pure, unshakable certainty, broke the stunned silence. "It's home." The two words were not an observation, but a recognition, as if a memory from a dream had suddenly solidified into reality. There were no cheers, only a profound, collective exhalation of a breath they felt they had been holding for 10,000 years. They had not just completed a journey. They had answered a summons to a place that had always been waiting for them, a key finally turning in a lock that had been crafted for its exact shape. What kind of civilization builds a house for a guest they will not meet for millennia? And how does it feel to finally step across the threshold? The landing struts settled into the soft, mossy ground with a sigh of finality. Evum, the name meant a new age, and the air itself seemed to agree. It was not the thin, recycled atmosphere of the arcs, but a rich, living breath that filled their lungs with a vitality they had only ever imagined. The first explorers stepped out, their boots sinking silently into a carpet of resilient, silver-green vegetation. Streams of water, clearer than any crystal, flowed over stones arranged in patterns that felt less like random geology and more like the graceful strokes of a calligrapher's brush. The trees were tall and willowy, their leaves shifting through colors in the gentle breeze, creating a soft, chiming melody. It was not a wilderness. It was a parkland, a garden that had been patiently maintained for its intended inhabitants. A small, six-legged creature with iridescent fur approached one of the scientists, its large, intelligent eyes holding no fear, only a deep and curious recognition. It did not flee. It tilted its head, trilled a soft, questioning note, and then trotted alongside her as if they were old companions on a morning walk. The flora and fauna did not simply exist here. They resonated with the newcomers on a fundamental level, as if every leaf and every creature was part of a symphony that had been waiting for their specific harmonic to finally be complete. This was not colonization. It was a homecoming to a house they had never seen, yet whose every detail felt intimately, profoundly known. What kind of civilization builds not just a world, but a feeling of belonging, and leaves it waiting in the dark for millennia? The first structures rose from the soil not as impositions, but as extensions of the landscape itself. There were no blueprints drafted on paper, only a shared vision held in the collective mind of the awakened. One moment, a clearing held nothing but the chiming trees and soft moss. The next, graceful arches of living wood and seamlessly fused stone began to curve upward from the ground, their forms guided by a harmony of mental focus and the planet's own latent cooperation. Towers grew like crystalline plants, their surfaces shimmering with captured light, while pathways wound through the emerging city not as paved streets, but as resilient, springy turf that felt alive underfoot. Kale stood at the edge of this breathtaking genesis, his voice a low hum that blended with the ambient sound of creation. "We build not on the land," he said, his words carrying a profound truth that settled over the workers, but with it. This was the new standard. In their old world, civilization was a constant struggle against nature, a war of concrete and steel waged upon the earth. Here, it was a conversation. A builder with an intuitive grasp of geology would gently persuade a bedrock formation to rise, forming the foundation of a communal hall. Another, whose senses could perceive the flow of water and nutrients, would guide the roots of a great tree to weave themselves into a bridge, strong and living. The city did not use power from the grid. It drew energy from the planet's own stable, thermal heart and from the light of the gentle sun, storing it in organic batteries that pulsed with a soft, golden glow. Waste was an alien concept, for every byproduct of their existence was seamlessly reabsorbed and recycled by the intelligent ecosystem they were part of. This was not architecture. It was symbiosis, a living partnership between a people and their world. They were not just building a city. They were learning to sing the same song as the planet, and in that harmony, they found a form of civilization that felt less like an achievement and more like a homecoming. What would a society, free from scarcity and conflict, choose to create when its only limit was the scope of its collective imagination? The heart of the new city was not a government building or a power generator, but a quiet grove where the air itself seemed to hold its breath. At its center, resting upon a simple pedestal of fused local stone, was all that remained of their past. The crystalline artifact, now a dull, opaque gray, was encased in a sphere of clear, hardened resin. It looked less like a technological marvel and more like a fossil, a beautiful, silent shell from which the living creature had long since departed. Around it, the monument rose in gentle, sweeping curves, its design echoing the double helix that had once glowed within the artifact's light. It was not a tomb, but a testament. Inscribed into the stone base, in letters that seemed grown rather than carved, was a single, profound sentence: "We were changed to become changers." These 5 words were not a history lesson for the children of Evam. They were a compass. A young girl, her hair shimmering with the faint, metallic highlights common to her generation, would often come here after her studies. She would place her small hand against the cool stone beneath the inert crystal and close her eyes. Her teachers did not need to tell her stories of a planet called Earth or a man named Aris Thorne. She could feel the echo of that entire journey, the longing and the sacrifice, resonating up from the stone into her bones. The monument did not tell them where they came from. It reminded them of why they were here. It was a permanent anchor to the understanding that their abilities were not for personal gain, but for a cosmic responsibility. To be a changer meant to see a barren rock and know how to coax an atmosphere from its minerals, to find a star system in turmoil and understand how to gently adjust its gravitational balance. The silent, gray crystal was the most important teacher on the planet because its very stillness screamed a powerful truth. The greatest gifts are not those we receive, but those we are prepared to give. The gentle hum of Evam was pierced by a new frequency, a signal that was not a sound but a pattern woven into the fabric of local space itself. It originated from a nearby nebula, a vast, swirling cloud of cosmic dust and gas that glowed with soft, shifting colors. The pattern was not random noise. It was a complex, repeating sequence of mathematical harmonies, a melody of resonant energy that mirrored the foundational codes of their own awakened biology. It felt less like a broadcast and more like a conversation already in progress, one they had only just begun to hear. The discovery sent a ripple of awe and trepidation through the fledgling civilization. They had found a home prepared for them, but they had not expected to find neighbors so soon. A scout team was quickly assembled, composed of those with the most refined perceptual abilities. Navigator Ilara, her mind now a perfect instrument for reading the subtle textures of reality, stood at the helm. As the small, agile scout ship prepared for its journey away from the safety of Evam, she looked at her crew, her eyes reflecting the nebula's distant light. Her voice was calm, filled with the weight of a profound realization. "Our journey is not over," she stated. "It is just beginning." The signal was not a warning or a threat. It was an invitation, a test of whether they had truly learned the gardener's final lesson. They were no longer just the caretakers of a single world. They were about to step onto a galactic stage, and the first act was about to begin. The nebula's signal was a beautiful lure, but the true test lay hidden in the silent void nearby. The scout ship followed a subtle harmonic thread to a small, rocky planet orbiting a dim red star. Its surface was a stark landscape of jagged rock and deep canyons, scoured by relentless radiation and bitter cold. Scans revealed no cities, no technology, not even a complex atmosphere. Yet the planet was not dead. In the perpetual shadows of the deepest chasms, sheltered near geothermal vents, the sensors detected simple, slug-like creatures. They were little more than blind, photosensitive sacs, absorbing thermal energy and slowly processing minerals from the vent fluids. They had no language, no tools, no society. They were simply alive. Ilara watched the data stream, her heart aching with a strange, protective tenderness. "They are the beginning," she whispered. "This is not a civilization to contact. It is a garden that has only just been seeded." The purpose of the signal became devastatingly clear. It was not a call for a meeting of equals. It was a final exam. The nebula's melody was a proctor, watching to see if they understood their homework. The knowledge from the artifact, now an integral part of their collective consciousness, rose to the surface. It was not a set of commands, but a library of gentle, persuasive techniques for coaxing a world toward life. They began with the atmosphere. A team of awakened, their minds merged in a single focus, reached out not with machines but with intent. They gently encouraged the planet's own volcanic outgassing, guiding the release of certain compounds and suppressing others, beginning the slow, patient work of building a protective blanket against the harsh stellar winds. They did not force the change. They persuaded the planet's own geological processes to cooperate, like reminding a body of its own capacity to heal. As they worked, a familiar presence settled over them, not as a voice, but as a wave of affirmation that resonated in their very cells. It was Aris, his consciousness still woven into the fabric of their being from his final act. His communication was pure meaning, devoid of individual ego. "This is our purpose now," the resonance conveyed, a truth that felt both new and as ancient as the stars themselves, to nurture life as we were nurtured. "We are not the owners of this garden, we are its caretakers." On the barren world below, the first faint traces of a stable atmosphere began to hold, and the simple creatures in the deep places, sensing the subtle shift in pressure and warmth, stirred with a new, quiet vitality. The awakened had not come to this world to conquer it or to study it. They had come to attend the birth of a potential that might, in a billion years, learn to look up at the stars itself. The transmission from Earth arrived not as a desperate plea, but as a gentle sigh of relief. The signal, boosted and cleaned by the old Omni-Corp satellite network they had long forgotten, painted a stunningly beautiful portrait. The gray, industrial smog that had once choked the continents was gone, replaced by vast, vibrant swaths of green that stretched from pole to pole. The oceans, once choked with plastic and acidification, now shimmered with a deep, clean blue, their currents visible from orbit like the veins of a healthy, sleeping giant. It was a planet reborn, breathing freely for the first time in millennia. But the true revelation was not the healed landscape. Deep within the renewed rainforests, the sensors detected complex, organized structures woven high in the canopy, cities of living wood and vine that housed the new dominant species. They had evolved from the primates and other mammals that had been altered by the final cascade, their forms now graceful and intelligent, their social patterns showing a deep, inherent connection to the planetary ecosystem. They were not conquerors of their world, but its conscious, integrated partners. The final line of the automated data stream was a simple, profound echo of the architect's own message. The cycle continues. The words settled over the people of Evam not with sadness but with a quiet, triumphant joy. Their departure had not been an abandonment. It had been the ultimate act of stewardship, a gift that allowed their first home to complete its own journey and give rise to a new chapter of life. They had not lost a world. They had gained a legacy. What other beautiful cycles of life had their own exodus set in motion across the cosmos? Her first cry was not a sound, but a gentle pulse of warmth that bloomed in the minds of everyone within the settlement. The child they named Lyra was born under Evam's twin moons, and from her first breath, she was a creature of pure resonance. Her parents, both among the first awakened, watched in a silence that was equal parts wonder and profound humility. Lyra did not learn the world, she conversed with it. Her nursery was not filled with the clutter of traditional toys, but with simple, natural objects, smooth stones, polished wood, and crystalline fragments. One afternoon, her mother watched as Lyra, barely able to sit up, focused her gaze on a small, fractured geode. The child made no sound, her tiny face a mask of serene concentration. The two broken halves of the stone simply lifted from the floor, hovered for a moment in a soft, golden light, and then fused back together seamlessly, the crystal interior now glowing with a gentle, internal luminescence it had never possessed before. This was not the focused effort of an awakened adult, requiring meditation and mental discipline. For Lyra, it was as natural as breathing. She was not manipulating matter. She was asking it to become whole again, and the substance of Evum itself was answering her call. Her abilities signaled something far greater than a new generation. The awakened had been given the key to the garden, but their children were born knowing the language of the soil. They were not just the next step in human evolution. They were the first true natives of a cosmos that had been waiting for them to arrive. The arrival was not announced by the roar of engines or the crackle of a radio signal. One moment, the sky above Evum was a tranquil expanse of soft blue. The next, 3 vessels hung there, silent and serene. They were not ships of metal and weld lines, but forms of what appeared to be solidified light, their shapes shifting like liquid crystal, reflecting the planet's own vibrant colors. They made no aggressive moves, emitted no threatening energy signatures. They simply waited, a patient and breathtaking presence. A single figure descended from the central vessel, not using a ramp, but stepping onto the air as if it were a solid staircase. The being was tall and graceful, its form humanoid but composed of the same shimmering, light-woven material as its ship. It moved toward the gathered leaders of Evum, and when it spoke, its voice was not a sound that traveled through the air, but a resonance that formed directly within their minds, a feeling of warmth and profound welcome. "Welcome to the Continuum," the Emissaries' thought voice echoed, rich with the weight of countless ages. "Your stewardship has begun. We have been observing your progress with great interest." The offer was not a treaty or a demand for allegiance. It was an invitation to a universe-wide alliance, a coalition of countless species who had, across the vast stretches of cosmic time, each found their own version of the artifact and passed through their own trial of awakening. They were not a government imposing laws, but a network of gardeners, a living library of shared knowledge dedicated to a single, sacred purpose: the gentle, persistent cultivation of life throughout the cosmos. The emissary shared glimpses of this vast alliance, a species of crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic vibrations to calm turbulent stellar nurseries. Another that was more like a collective consciousness of gas, able to gently guide the formation of planetary atmospheres. Each member had a unique origin and method, yet all were united by the same understanding that had finally dawned on humanity. They did not conquer worlds, they tended them. They did not seek to rule the universe, but to help it flourish. The emissaries' final thought was a simple, profound truth that settled deep into their souls. You are not alone in the garden. You have simply found your place in a fellowship that spans the stars. The gentle hum of Evum was not a sound that could be silenced, but a new discordant note began to weave through its harmony. They called themselves the Purists, a small but determined group who saw their altered state not as an ascent, but as a profound loss. They missed the raw, unfiltered emotions of their old lives, the very struggles and limitations that had once defined their humanity. In secret, they had salvaged components from the old Ark medical bays, piecing together a crude but functional device designed to isolate and suppress the awakened genetic sequences. A technological lobotomy meant to strip away their new abilities and return them to what they once were. The conflict came to a head in a secluded canyon where the Purists had established their makeshift clinic. They stood facing a delegation from the city, led by Kale and Lena. The air was thick not with anger, but with a profound and painful sorrow. A young woman named Ilya, her hands trembling, stepped forward from the Purist line. Her voice, when she spoke, was raw with a grief that resonated in the stillness. "I just want to feel the rain on my skin again," she pleaded, without knowing how every drop is formed. "I want to feel lonely and sad and human." This was not a rebellion of violence, but of identity. The Purists were not fighting the new world. They were mourning the old one, and they were willing to sacrifice connection, health, and even their extended lifespans to recapture a feeling of individual struggle they equated with being real. Kale, his own form a testament to the change, responded not with force, but with a shared ache of understanding. To revert is not to return to what you were, he said softly, the static in his voice a gentle hum. It is to become a ghost in a world that has moved on. Your sadness, your loneliness, they are not gone. They have simply been joined by a deeper connection. To sever that is to choose a smaller, darker room when the entire garden is waiting for you outside. The standoff became a silent vigil, a heartbreaking tableau of a people grappling with the ultimate cost of their evolution. Was true progress worth the loss of the very imperfections that had once made them who they were? Or was this new unity a beautiful cage that erased the messy, beautiful struggle of being an individual? The Purists held their ground, their desire for a forgotten past poised to clash with a future they could no longer embrace. The standoff in the canyon was a quiet war of heartbeats, not weapons. Ilya's plea hung in the air, a raw testament to a grief that technology could not fix. The Council's response did not come as an order, but as a proposal carried on the wind itself. They offered the Purists a vast, untouched valley on the far side of Evum's primary continent, a place of stunning, unmanaged wilderness where the planet's song was a gentle whisper, not a conscious chorus. There, they could build a life free from the pressure of constant connection, using only the strength of their hands and the clarity of their unaltered senses. They would be left to experience rain, loneliness, and joy in their purest, most fragile forms. The ruling council's declaration was broadcast to the entire population, its words settling like a soothing balm. Evolution is not a cage, it is an invitation, and an invitation, by its very nature, can be declined with grace. The compromise was a profound act of maturity for the fledgling civilization. It acknowledged that the highest form of strength is not in enforcing a perfect system, but in preserving the right to choose an imperfect one. The Purists' exodus to their sanctuary became a pilgrimage of remembrance. Their choice did not weaken the unity of Evum, it strengthened it, serving as a living reminder of the messy, beautiful struggle from which they had all emerged. Their valley became a sacred place, not of exile but of perspective, a quiet testament that even in a perfected world, the human heart must be free to find its own definition of home. Evum's long-range sensors were designed to map gravitational tides and stellar nurseries, but the anomaly at the galactic core defied every category. It was not a star, nor a black hole. It was a structure, a geometric shape of impossible scale, dormant and drifting in the heart of the galaxy. The data streams flowing into the planetary network showed an object that made the original Earth artifact look like a single grain of sand beside a mountain. Its sheer size warped the local space around it, creating a silent, massive shadow in the cosmic background radiation. This was not a tool left behind for a single species. This was something else entirely, a monument or perhaps a machine built on a scale meant to influence the galaxy itself. The discovery sent a quiet tremor through the collective consciousness of Evum. They had found their place in the garden, but now they had found the garden's foundational stone. A mission was immediately proposed, a journey to the very center of the Milky Way to understand what they were truly a part of. When the call for a mission lead went out, Kale did not hesitate. His form, still humming with the subtle static of his transformation, stood before the assembly. His voice, layered with the resonance of a living interface, carried a quiet and absolute certainty. Some questions are meant to be answered, he stated. This one has been waiting for us. His declaration was not an act of bravery, but of necessity. To ignore this would be to live in a house without ever seeking to understand its cornerstone. The mission would be the most daring undertaking since the exodus from Earth. A voyage into the deepest unknown, not to find a new home, but to finally meet the architects of reality on their own terms. The silence inside the galactic core artifact was not an absence of sound, but a density of pure potential, Kale stood before the central interface, a smooth plane of what appeared to be obsidian, and placed his hands upon its surface. His own internal resonance, a constant, low hum of interconnected thought, met the artifact's dormant frequency. The contact was not a spark, but a fusion. The obsidian plane dissolved into a swirling vortex of light, and the chamber around them vanished, replaced by an infinite, three-dimensional star map of breathtaking scope. It was not a map of galaxies as humanity knew them. Each point of light was a single artifact, like the one they had found on Earth, each one a glowing node in a web of staggering complexity. Lines of shimmering energy connected them, a living nervous system spanning the entire observable universe. Kale's voice, when it came through the comms, was layered with the weight of cosmic revelation, a whisper that carried across the void to Evum. This is the source, he transmitted, the words resonating in the minds of every listener. The place where life is designed and directed. The display was not static. They watched as pulses of energy, like gentle commands, traveled along the web to specific nodes. One pulse reached a distant galaxy, and the display zoomed in to show a barren planet suddenly blooming with a new, complex atmosphere. Another pulse traveled to a different node, and they witnessed the gentle guidance of a species' evolutionary path away from self-destruction. The artifacts were not just tools left behind. They were active terminals in a continuous, universal process of cultivation. The architects were not a species that had lived and died. They were a function of the universe itself, a timeless, distributed intelligence whose sole purpose was the careful, persistent tending of life. The great mystery of who made us was answered not with a face, but with a system. We were not the project of a distant god, but the cherished work of a cosmic gardener whose hands were the very laws of physics, and whose canvas was all of existence. The realization was both humbling and empowering. They had not found their creators, they had found their purpose, woven into the fundamental fabric of reality. The choice presented by the Galactic Hub was not a simple promotion. It was a fundamental division of paths, a fork in the road of existence itself. One path allowed them to remain as the wise and beloved caretakers of their own celestial neighborhood, nurturing the fledgling worlds they had already begun to tend. The other path was an invitation to step behind the curtain of reality, to join the timeless architects in the very act of universal design, to weave the strands of life into the cold voids between galaxies. This was not a command from a superior authority, but an offer of partnership from a force that had become their mentor. The decision was too monumental, too deeply personal, to be made by any single leader or council. For the first time since their awakening, every single individual on Evum was called upon to cast a vote. This would not be a vote for a policy, but for the soul of their species. Would they choose the comfort of a known purpose, or the terrifying responsibility of infinite creation? The quiet hum of the planet became a symphony of contemplation as millions of minds turned inward, weighing the profound implications of their own destiny. A young terraformer, who found deep joy in guiding a single river to flow on a barren moon, wondered if he could bear the abstraction of designing an entire star system. A historian, whose life's work was preserving the memory of Earth, questioned if joining the architects meant erasing the last traces of their own poignant origin story. The debate was not between right and wrong, but between two different kinds of love. A love for the intimate, hands-on work of a gardener, and a love for the grand, conceptual vision of the master planner. Each perspective held its own beauty and its own sacrifice. As the moment of the vote arrived, a profound silence fell across Evum. There were no campaigns, no attempts to persuade. This was a choice each heart had to make in the quiet sanctuary of its own connection to the cosmos. The collective decision, when it was felt rather than announced, resonated through the planetary consciousness not as a triumph of one side over the other, but as a single, clear note of purpose. They had chosen to remain. They had looked into the infinite and chosen the finite, understanding that their greatest contribution was not to become distant gods, but to be present, compassionate stewards. In choosing their corner of the garden, they had defined the most human part of their new existence: the need for a home, for a story with a scale they could still feel, and for a love that was rooted in a specific and beautiful piece of the universe. The choice was not a whisper, but a thunderous chord of consensus that resonated through the collective soul of Evum. The vote to join the architects was overwhelming, a unified yes that felt less like a decision and more like a final, deep breath before a plunge into a boundless ocean. It was the acceptance of a responsibility so vast it defied human scale, an agreement to become stewards not of a world, but of the very processes that create worlds. In the profound silence that followed the vote, a familiar presence stirred within their shared awareness, a gentle beacon of memory and purpose. It was the echo of Aris Thorne, his sacrifice now woven into the fabric of their being. His voice, not as a sound but as a foundational truth, rose within them. We were given a gift, the echo resonated, a wave of calm certainty washing over millions. Now we must learn to give it. This was the final lesson, the culmination of their entire journey. The artifact had not been a key to power, but a lesson in reciprocity. True evolution was not about what you could take from the universe, but what you could contribute to its endless, beautiful unfolding. They were stepping away from the comfortable role of gardeners in a single plot, and accepting the mantle of co-authors in the story of existence itself. Their new work would be abstract, conducted on a canvas of space-time and probability. They would learn to whisper to nebulae, encouraging the formation of stable solar systems. They would gently guide the evolutionary paths of nascent life forms on a billion different worlds, not by direct intervention, but by subtly adjusting environmental pressures, by ensuring a planet had just the right conditions for a spark of intelligence to ignite and flourish. One of their first tasks was a delicate operation in a distant, young galaxy, where a supermassive black hole's violent eruptions threatened to sterilize an entire spiral arm. They did not build a shield or a weapon. Instead, a team of the awakened, their minds merged into a single, focused intent: learn to project a calming resonance into the chaotic energies around the singularity. It was like humming a lullaby to a raging storm, persuading the ferocious jets of radiation to bend ever so slightly, carving out a safe harbor where planetary formation could continue uninterrupted. They were not conquering the cosmos. They were learning its language, its rhythms, and its needs, becoming partners in a dance that had begun at the dawn of time. The echo of Aris was their constant guide, a reminder that the greatest power they possessed was not the ability to reshape stars, but the wisdom to do so with a gentle hand and a compassionate heart. Having accepted this infinite responsibility, how would they ensure their own humanity, their capacity for wonder and connection, did not get lost in the unimaginable scale of their new work? The decision to join the architects was a choice to shed their physical forms and become patterns of pure consciousness. Kale and Alara stood before the council, not as petitioners, but as living bridges to the next state of being. Their bodies, already more energy than matter, began to glow with a soft, radiant light, their individual features softening into a serene and universal countenance. We will become the hands that shape the nebulae. Kale's voice resonated, now a chorus of harmonic frequencies. Our thoughts will be the gravity that guides new stars into existence. Ilara reached out, not with a hand but with a tendril of gentle light, touching the minds of everyone on Evum one last time. Do not think of this as a goodbye, her thought voice whispered, filled with a love as vast as the cosmos. Think of it as us becoming the soil from which a million new worlds will grow. As they stepped into the swirling light of the galactic hub's core, their forms dissolved into the great tapestry of cosmic information. A final, profound message echoed from the fading light, a promise and a blessing for the civilization they left behind. We go to build eternity. Remember us. The space where they had stood was now empty, yet the air itself felt charged with a new and permanent potential. They were not gone. They had become a fundamental force of the universe, as present and essential as time or gravity. The people of Evum felt the subtle shift in reality's fabric, a gentle affirmation that their mentors were now part of the endless, beautiful work of creation itself. How does a civilization move forward when its greatest pioneers have become the very laws of nature? The gentle light of dawn on Evum revealed a world where thought and matter danced as one. A young child, not yet old enough for formal schooling, sat by a stream, not throwing pebbles, but simply looking at the water. In response to her quiet focus, the stream's current parted, forming a perfect, shimmering archway for a family of six-legged, otter-like creatures to pass through unharmed. She did not see this as a feat of immense power. It was a simple act of kindness as natural to her as breathing. This generation, born from the fully awakened, did not learn to manipulate their environment. They learned to converse with it, their innate abilities making them less like rulers of the planet and more like its conscious, caring voice. The ultimate promise of the artifact was not a universe of silent, powerful gods, but a family of compassionate stewards, their every instinct tuned toward nurturing the life around them. These children could feel the slow, patient thoughts of the tectonic plates beneath their feet, and hear the faint, joyful songs of the distant stars. Their playground was the cosmos, and their only game was creation. What does a society look like when every child holds the power of a deity, yet chooses only to build and to heal? The elder's voice was a soft murmur beneath the twin moons, their silver light weaving through the leaves of the whispering trees. A circle of children sat around him, their eyes reflecting not just the celestial glow, but the faint, internal light of their own awakened nature. In his hands, he held not a book or a date, a crystal, but a simple, smooth river stone, dark and ordinary. This, he told them, is all that remains of the world we once knew. A world of separation, of struggle, of a loneliness so deep we built towers to scrape the sky just to feel a little closer to something greater. He spoke of a man named Aris who became a star to light their way, and of a crystal that held the blueprint for everything they now were. The story unspooled not as a history lesson, but as a memory they all shared in their blood, a foundational myth of their own existence. He told them of the great choice, the Exodus, and the quiet understanding that settled over their people when they first stepped onto the soil of Evum and knew they were home. The children listened, not with the wide-eyed shock of hearing something new, but with the quiet recognition of remembering a dream. One small girl, her hair shimmering with starlight, reached out and touched the elder's stone. For a moment, it glowed with a soft, golden warmth, and in that light, they could all feel the echo of an entire planet. The rush of its oceans, the sigh of its forests, the hopes of its people. The elder smiled, his gaze encompassing them all. "We are not just humanity anymore," he said, his voice blending with the gentle night wind. "We are the universe, awake and wondering what we will become next." The story was over, but the telling had just begun, for every child there now carried it forward. A new question waiting to be asked in the great, unfolding story of